Welcome everyone to another session of TriTech University. My name is Bill Steffen, and today we're going to be continuing once again our exploration of accounting themed April, and we're going to be looking today specifically at custom accounting reports, exactly what they are, how they may benefit you at the store, and just ways of setting them up, using them, and making sure that everything is understood as far as how they operate. As always, before we jump into too much nitty-gritty, I do want to go ahead and make sure everyone knows how they can communicate with me. So we are using GoToWebinar, and on your screen, you likely have a GoToWebinar toolbar. Now on that toolbar, there's going to be a questions box. And if at any point throughout today's broadcast, if you do have a question on the content, feel free to go ahead and put that into that question box. I'm going to be glancing over occasionally to make sure that I'm seeing those questions as they're coming in, and I'll do my best to answer them as I see them come in. Of course, we'll have some time at the end for a full-fledged Q&A session. And speaking of that toolbar, if it is taking up too much space on your screen and you're having a hard time seeing what it is that I'm covering, feel free to click on there's going to be a little orange button with a white arrow on it, and what that should do is shrink that toolbar off to one side of your screen, and that way you should be able to see everything that I'm manipulating on the screen. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at this sample AMSI system that I have here on screen. So what I have here, I've just got a basic music store. It's the same one that I've been using throughout the month so far, that I just restored on Monday. So we should be able to take a look at a very nice, small, compact sample set as far as numbers. And that way, I believe it can help to bring forward the concept of how this is going to operate without having too much to look at any one time. So AMSI being an accounting system at its core, that's what the A in AMSI stands for, it basically has the ability to replace any type of accounting system you may already be using. Say that 5 times slow. If you're already using QuickBooks and you're wanting to export that out to QuickBooks, or if you're wanting to take advantage of AMSI's accounting and use it full-fledged, or if you're using pen and paper, whatever you may be using, AMSI very likely can match that, and in some cases even exceed it. And you then have the simplicity of one system that you're relying on as far as these figures without potentially worrying about, did this information export out or anything like that. So in conjunction with that, of course, there are a number of reports already in the general ledger system that you can take advantage of. Things like balance sheets and income statements and trial balances. And if you needed to look at the nitty-gritty of the detail that makes up those entries, you can run reports such as list ledger by reference or individual ledger account. You could also run a detail ledger listing like we did before, or a trial balance like we've been looking at in some of these other sessions this week. But let's say that you want to take what already is there, well, not necessarily take it, but let's say that the balance sheet or the income statement that are canned with the system, let's say they don't necessarily present that information to you in the way that you or your bookkeeper or your accountant would like that information to be outlined, and you'd like to manipulate it to your own desires. Or like what we'll be doing today, maybe you'd like to create an entire accounting report specific to the ledger balances that you're looking for, and you could name them whatever you would like without having to constantly go in and take those informational figures and export them out to Excel and manipulate them, or all different things like that. That's basically the idea behind the custom accounting reports feature. So we're going to be looking at that today, how that all works, how you set it up, and then basically once you've got them set up, you can then come into this reports listing and you can either run the custom accounting report, the custom balance sheet, or the custom income statement, either as is or in a monthly kind of format. Now, the way this gets set up, I'm going to use the on-screen touchscreen menu. We're going to go and take a look at maintenance and ledger, and the program is simply called Setup Custom Accounting Reports. Now, if you are a convert from older systems, such as versions 11 or older, you may recall that there used to be two settings in here called accounting report headings and then the actual accounting reports themselves. We've consolidated that into one system here in version 12. So the way this works now is when you come into custom reports, basically this detail that you see down here on the left-hand side and down below that, that's going to be the actual name of the report and the type of report, as well as whether or not you're going to set up any kind of security with it. I'm just going to grab my little highlighter tool and make sure that you're kind of seeing what I'm trying to present here. So basically this left-hand side is going to be the actual names of the reports that you're creating, whether you've created just one, or if you've created 2 or 3 or more, they'll all kind of be laid out there on that left-hand side. Now on the right-hand side, based on whichever report you have highlighted, you're going to be setting up the content that will be displayed on that report. And that's going to be made up of a series of line items. The line items will be one of 3 types. There will be a header line, a detail line, and a total line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build a custom report here live on the webinar, and we're going to take a look at that report probably several times over the course of the webinar, just so you can kind of see how this works, what the relationship is between details and totals, what all these different fields mean on screen as we're setting this up. So to get started off, we're going to go ahead and click the Add button, as we always do, and it's going to ask us for the description of our report. And we're just going to set up a real basic one. We're just going to call this Test Accounting Report. If you wanted to give this a security level, you can have it be anywhere from 1 to 3. And the idea is that the 1 would be the lowest security clearance. That does relate to security settings that you can set up in the security employee groups portion of AIM-SI. If you would like, excuse me, if you would like more detail on how the security works, I would encourage you to check out the webinar that I did on, I believe it was called Module Mechanics, Employees and Security. So definitely check that out if setting up security on these reports is of an interest to you. But then you're going to choose what type of report this is. Now, if you're setting up a custom balance sheet or income statement, you'll want to make sure that you do bring into the report all of the necessary ledger accounts that would normally make up a balance sheet or income statement. And by default, the accounts below 400, so 400 dash whatever, any accounts prior to that, which would typically be your asset, liability, and equity accounts, you're going to need to make sure you include all of those on the balance sheet in order for the balance sheet to be able to run. Likewise, with the income statement, you'll want to make sure that you include all accounts 400 and up, save for any ones you might have at the very end that are labeled non-operating. Those would typically be your income and expense accounts. And if you are confused as to what I mean by that, just as a basic run over on that, you can get more detail on that in the Module Mechanics webinar that I did on General Ledger. But just as a quick reminder or refresher, if we go into the ledger maintenance and take a look at the chart of accounts, basically looking at the kind of the default ledger setup, your 100 accounts are usually your asset type accounts. Your 200s are your liabilities by default. So if I go ahead and click on any one of these, that'll be a liability. And then if we go down to the 300s, of which there are all of 2 accounts, there's the capital stock equity and the retained earns equity. Now, of course, the chart of account is completely customizable, so you'll just want to make sure that if you do add or remove any of these ledger accounts, it's best to try and follow that format that already exists. And for what it's worth, I'll throw out there that if you do decide to manipulate exactly where the accounts cross over from balance sheet to income statement, there is a system variable. I believe it's called income or ledger income. Yeah, ledger income system variable. Basically, this is the ledger number that starts income. You can see it defaults to 400-1. Again, I would recommend following that format of a 3-digit ledger number and then a 1 or 2-digit sub number. Now, if you're wondering about what assets, liabilities, all those different things are, that's something that I really can't help out with. Those would be more accounting related questions. I do know enough to be dangerous about what those definitions are, but quite honestly, I would encourage you to speak with a bona fide certified bookkeeper, CPA, things like that, or even take a financial accounting class if that would be helpful. I think it would be, as kind of understanding what all these different things are. AMSI does adhere to GAAP standards, generally accepted accounting principles. So without getting too off track, let's head back to the topic du jour. So custom accounting reports. So back to the way this gets set up. Like I said, if you're setting up a balance sheet or income statement, you just want to make sure that you do include all of those ledger numbers that would normally fall on the canned balance sheet and income statement reports. But the idea there is that you could manipulate the order in which they would normally display. And you can kind of group them differently. So the way the normal balance sheet and income statement reports would work is it would go kind of in chronological order, if you will, or numerical order, I guess is a better term for that, kind of starting at the top 100-1, moving down to 399-99, and then it would group them by the grouping. So with every ledger account, there's a grouping such as cash on hand and bank, which is assigned to assets and current assets. So basically it would go assets and then current assets and then cash on hand and bank, and then all the different ledger numbers that are assigned to that grouping. And then it might be the next grouping for accounts receivable, inventory assets, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing for the income statement for your sales, and then your cost of goods sold, and then your other sales, and then getting into your expenses and so forth. To set up a custom accounting report, you could basically group them any way you want based on the detail lines that you'll be establishing. And like I said, we're going to get into exactly what that means here. Now, what we'll be setting up today, hand in hand and on tape here, is going to be just an accounting report. With an accounting report, it doesn't necessarily have to adhere to balance sheet or income statement parameters as far as making sure all of those balance sheet and P&L ledger numbers are on the report. That way we don't have to worry about spending the time to set all that up. We can go through a very basic one here on screen, and hopefully the concepts will be made clear so that you can think about how you want to set up your reports. So we're going to start off with an accounting report, and we're just going to save that just so you can see it now shows up over there. And now we'll basically be able to display or start creating the actual line items, the content that will show on this report. Now, if we think about the way that a report kind of is structured when you go to print out a report, there's usually a header that kind of headlines what the report is. There may be subheaders that kind of create different clusters of information. Those clusters will be made up of detail, and then you might have a subtotal for each cluster. You might then be totaling up different subtotals, and then you might go to other sections. That's exactly what we're going to be doing here with the custom accounting report builder. So to start off, just to kind of make sure everyone is on the same page as far as these different buttons on screen, you'll notice there are some buttons kind of below the fields here, the clone, delete, add, and exit buttons. So these are central to just the master list of reports. If you needed to add a second or third or additional reports, you click this button. If you need to delete a report, you could click the delete button to delete a report. And if you wanted to create another report but start with an existing one, you can clone a report, whichever one you have highlighted. Now, This add button, you'll notice, is the only one kind of above that's currently available to click. The delete button adjacent to it, as well as the add and delete buttons below that, are currently grayed out. This is the add button to add a line item. So that's what we're going to start off with. You'll notice when I click this add button, I now have the ability to fill in my line type, my line text, my line indent, and then there may be some other options that I want to select as far as the rest of the content of the report. So like I said, we might be starting off with a header to kind of headline what the report actually is. So we're going to create a header line. Excuse me. And we're just going to give this a basic heading. So we're going to call this Professor TriTech's Awesome Accounting Report. Something, something mundane and modest. And then as far as the line indent, that's basically going to be where that text would appear on the report. You can either have no indent, so it's going to be right on the left-hand edge, and then you have up to 3 levels of indent. So if you kind of think about tab, 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 that's first level, second level, third level, and then completely centered on the report. Since this is kind of the header of the whole report, I'm going to say centered. Now there's basically no other detail that we would need to fill in for a header line. You'll notice that a lot of these things are basically grayed out. I can't put in a group. I can't check mark this reverse sign box. I could put in a page break if I really wanted to and have just one page that simply says Professor TriTech's Awesome Accounting Report. Then you'd have to open it up. That could actually be something that you may want to consider if what you're printing out, you kind of want to have like a cover sheet and maybe the details are kind of below that. But in the day and age of electronic reports and things like that, that may not really be necessary. And of course, there's really nothing to stop someone from just flipping open the first page. Of course, if you are intending on faxing this, then you could kind of build in a cover letter if you really wanted to think of it that way. But we're just going to go with it as it is. We're just going to save that, and you'll see this now shows a line item here. The type is H for header, and the description is Professor TriTech's Awesome Accounting Report. Let's carry on. We'll go ahead and click the add button, and now we'll create kind of like a subheader. So I'm going to create another header line, and just to keep myself on pace, I'm going to create, in essence, a very basic balance sheet. It's not going to be a full balance sheet. Like I said, you would need to have all the different ledger accounts that make up a balance sheet, but it's going to be, in my opinion, a balance sheet mini. I'm going to focus on just really a few basic ledger accounts. So we'll call this subheader, if you will, assets, and I'm going to indent that just a little bit. I'm going to say this is the first level of indent, and then I'm going to go ahead and save that. You'll see that this is now the second line. I'm going to add a third line, and this is where we're going to start getting into detail. So with detail, now let's call this my cash on hand. Just again, keep it basic. And I'm going to indent this the second level. So again, no indent, dent 1, dent 2, dent 3, and then centered. So that's basically your 4 levels of indent, technically 5 if you consider the no indent as kind of a first level, if you will. Now, you'll notice that once I've selected the detail option, some other fields have become available to fill in. For example, the reverse sign is now available to checkmark, and I can also add content to this table over here. Now, this is going to be core to a detail line. When we're talking about a detail line on the report itself, there's typically just going to be one line that'll have some kind of figure on it. We need to tell MSI what detail is going to make up that figure. And because this is accounting reports, we need to tell it basically which ledger accounts to look at to draw on that amount. And that's where these add and delete buttons come in. By clicking the add button here, it's going to basically ask us to select a ledger account from the chart of accounts. I'm going to select my cash on hand. and pull that in. It's then going to ask me if I want to select a source. Now, if you're an AMSI veteran specific to bookkeeping and general ledger, you may recall that every ledger detail entry has a 2-letter source code. If I hit F6 here, okay, so I was thinking if I could hit F6 there, it might bring up a listing of the source codes, but they're pretty basic. There's going to be things like GJ for general journal, CD for check disbursement, SJ for sales journal, stuff like that. There's other places where you can get a kind of a master list of the source codes. That's assuming that you want to kind of segregate or focus on specific entries using those sources. If you don't care about what the source is and you just want any entries that are affecting that particular ledger account to come into the report, you leave it blank and you say okay. Because this particular subtext is going to be my cash on hand, and I don't really have any other ledger accounts that are kind of specific to cash on hand, I'm not going to select any others. So I'm not going to pull in any more, and I'm going to go ahead and hit save. So basically you'll see I now have a line item there for my cash on hand. I'm going to add another detail line item. So I'll hit the add button, and then actually I'm going to say a detail line. I'm going to now say this is my cash in the bank. My cash in the bank. And I'm going to, again, indent this 2 levels. So I'm going to add 2 accounts. I'm going to add the savings account, select that, no source. And I'm going to add a second detail for checking account 1, no source, and checking account 2, and no source. And that's basically going to make up the contents of the second detail line item called my cash in the bank. I'm going to save that. Now I'm going to add a total line. I'm going to hit the add button and hit the add button. There we go. Now I'm going to do a total line, and I'm going to say this is my cash subtotal. And I'm going to indent this all the way to the 3rd level. And I'm going to give this total group 1, if I could get my mouse there. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. So you might notice that the save and cancel buttons appear up there. This is something that I'm getting used to as well. Just remember that the save and cancel buttons down here are for the report in its entirety. Now let's go ahead and actually see what this can look like so far, just to, before I get too far ahead and potentially lose anyone. So we're going to exit out of here, and I'm going to make use of the maintenance screen as well as access the report up here. So reports and general ledger, and we'll go to custom accounting reports. Now, when the custom accounting reports report selection screen comes up, this would specifically show any custom reports that you've set up that are specifically accounting reports. If I had set up any ones that were labeled balance sheet or income statement in the report type, they would not be showing up here. They would be showing up when I go to run specifically custom balance sheet or custom income statement, either the straight one or the monthly one. So I'm going to go ahead and choose my test accounting report. I can run this for any date range I want because I don't have a whole lot of content in here. I'm just going to do basically the beginning of the year through today. If I wanted to, I could break this down to specific locations, tax authorities, departments. We'll be talking about departments when we get into budgeting. And then if I wanted to, I could also look at specific entries from specific workstations. I could use prior year ledger if I was running this date range prior to a year that was closed. We'll be talking about that more specifically when we get to the year-end webinar. And then if I wanted to, I could show the detail that actually is going to be making up these balances. And I could also include deposits, which are basically, entries into your checking account and stuff like that. But basically, I'm just going to go ahead and run this report, and we'll print this to screen so that we can take a look at this very basic report. Now you can see how basically this has got the, I'm going to grab my highlighter tool here. So Test accounting report, that's kind of the main heading. And then of course, this is going to say all the detail that I just ran this for. So all locations, all tax authorities, all workstations for the date range that I've run it for. This is page 1 of 1, no surprise there. There's the first line, the first header line that I put in. So let's kind of erase the drawings here, and that way you can kind of see what I've got here. So this is the header line 1. Notice how that's centered. Over here we have the second header line that I put in. You can see how that's indented just a little bit. So that's the assets section. My cash in the bank is indented 2 sets. And then over here we see an amount coming up for 37,089.31. And then my cash subtotal is 37,089. Now, notice how it didn't include my cash on hand, and I believe that's actually because I don't have any money in that ledger account. So let's do this. Let's erase the drawings, and let's go back and take a look at what the detail was that made up this report. So I'm going to rerun the same report, and I'm going to show details, and we'll go ahead and put this up to the screen again. So you can see that in this case, we're running this for all locations. Let's actually do this a slightly different way. Let's do this just for one location, just so we're not seeing, in essence, a bunch of duplicate entries, because this is a basic test system that I have. So you can see how this is basically showing us some detail that's making up these entries. So these are basically the descriptions, the ledger account of the entry, the source, or excuse me, the store code, the tax authority code, the location code, or excuse me, that's the workstation, the employee who was logged in. So these are all just default entries, because again, it's just some basic ledger detail that I've got in here as a test. The source code, BB for beginning balances, CD for check disbursement, GJ for general journal, the dates of the entries, and then the actual amounts. Now notice how basically what we're seeing here is some figures are in brackets, and some figures, like for example this 50,000 down here, are not in brackets. So basically the way that would work, if you don't reverse the sign, I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, but if you don't reverse the sign, you're basically your assets, or excuse me, your debits are going to be in a positive perspective, and then your credits would be, well, not necessarily negative, but opposite. So they would be in the brackets, or in this case, parentheses, technically. Now, it's going to do the basic math for you. So we can, if we wanted to really add all this up, 50,000 less all of these amounts comes out to a net total in this case for these entries of 25,564.61. Now I'm going to show you what happens if we go ahead and reverse that sign. So we're going to go back into the setup. We're going to highlight the test accounting report. We're going to highlight the my cash in the bank, and I'm going to check mark reverse sign. I'm going to save that detail, and then I'm going to save the report. And let's rerun that report now just to see what happens with that. So reports, general ledger, and custom accounting reports. Again, I'm going to choose that same report, 1/1 of 09, and then let's show the details just to keep it kind of consistent with what we're going to look at, and run the report and print it to screen. So now notice how up here, I'm going to grab my highlighter tool. Notice how these entries here still kind of stay the same. So the 50,000 debit is still showing as a 50,000 positive per se. All of these credits are still showing as opposites. But notice how I'm going to erase those so I can specifically point out right here. Do you see how that's now actually showing as an opposite? So it's reversing the sign of that detail line item. Notice how, in contrast to that, the my cash subtotal is still showing a positive, if you will, of that same amount. And that's because we did not reverse the sign of the total line item. That's basically the concept there. So in essence, when you reverse the sign, it's not necessarily actually reversing the math that would go into making up that detail. It's strictly for just aesthetics, essentially. If we think about the way that debits and credits work, asset accounts usually would have a debit balance. Liabilities would usually have a credit. So usually when you're looking at a balance sheet, the amounts that are in assets would usually, you'd want those to kind of be considered a positive. Your liabilities you might want to consider to be negative. So if you basically just wanted them to be outlined in that way, you don't reverse the signs on those particular line items for detail and total. But if you, let's say you were setting up a balance sheet and you didn't want them to be showing as a quote unquote negative, when you get to the liability section, you may want to reverse the signs of those entries. This comes into more play if we're talking about the income statement groups of accounts. So usually your income accounts, those would normally be having a credit balance. So by default, if we didn't reverse the sign, they'd be kind of showing in that bracket as kind of an opposite or negative value. And again, not that it's a negative value, it's just an overall credit balance. And we want to be able to kind of display that without having to have specific sections for credit or debit. It's just total balance. And likewise, the expenses would normally have a debit balance, but if we think about expenses, these are amounts that we've paid out. So a P&L, profit and loss, would normally be what you've brought in as revenue or income less the expenses. So you would typically be reversing the signs on all of those detail line items. Again, just for aesthetics. When it's all said and done, reversing the signs is not going to have an impact on the actual math of the report. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to carry on. If there are any questions, definitely let me know in the questions box. I'll do my best to answer those as we go along. Now, I'm going to draw your attention to that total line. Notice how basically it didn't really fluctuate from the my cash in the bank line versus the my cash subtotal. Let's just go ahead and make sure I've got some entries in that my cash line. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go back and edit the report. We'll pull up the test accounting report. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another entry here. Let's see, what would have some figures in it? Oh, I know. Actually, let's not even add another line here. Let's do this. So let's go ahead and add a line, just carrying on as opposed to adding detail. Let's go ahead and do another detail line. We'll indent this. So we'll call this my inventory. And then we'll indent that to the second level. And then we don't want the cash on hand in that one. Let's go ahead and add inventory band and inventory orc and no sources. So that's going to basically now show up. We'll go ahead and save that. You'll see how that's again kind of carrying down the list of, we've got assets, cash on hand, cash in the bank, a my cash subtotal, and then we'll do my inventory. Let's do one more. Let's do another detail, and we'll call this one receivables. And we'll indent that one second level, and we will go ahead and pull in any receivables. I don't think I actually have any receivables, but we'll just pretend that we do. That way, if there actually were any, they'd be showing up as line items. So we'll do sales contracts and rent to own. All right, so we'll save that. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring our attention back to this total line. So recall how this is total group 1. I'm going to explain what total groups are here, or try to explain anyway. I think in this particular instance, it's best to just kind of demonstrate how totals work rather than try to explain total groups. So just pay attention to that. This first total line that I've got on the report is total group 1. I'm going to add another line. We're going to make this be a total line. I'm going to say this is inventory and receivables subtotal. And I'm going to indent this one to the third level. And now I'm going to also make this group 1 as well. I'm going to save that. Now I'm going to add another total line. And I'm going to call this my assets total. Again, it's just real basic report. And again, I am by no means a CPA. I just stayed at the Holiday Inn Express last night. So let's go ahead and we'll center this line item. And I'm going to make this one total group 2. And we'll save that. So just to pay attention here again, so we've got the headers, which again are just basically text fields on the screen or on the report. We've got 2 details, my cash on hand, which is just the 101 account, my cash in the bank, savings in the 2 checking accounts, my cash subtotal, which basically is looking at all of the fields above it, all the detail fields, and it's basically looking for anything between it and the last total, if you will. So again, that's total group 1. My inventory is the next detail line item that's made up of the asset amounts in the band and orchestra accounts. We've got another line item for receivables made up of the receivable details. And then we've got another total line item, still total group 1. Basically what we're going to see is this is going to be totaling just these 2 line items. It's going to ignore this total. And then we've got a total line right after that, total group 2. And that's basically going to look at these 2 amounts. So we're going to see that in action, hopefully. So let's exit and go back to the custom accounting report. Test accounting 1109. We'll show details, and we'll do this just for the Dubuque location. Let's go ahead and run the report, print to screen. So actually, you know what? I'm going to rerun that report, but not for details, just to keep the screen a little bit cleaner. Okay, so here we see my cash in the bank. Again, I forgot to uncheck that that line, but basically it's just aesthetics. So the 25,564 for the my cash in the bank, as well as the subtotal. Then we've got the my inventory, and you can see how that's made up of a total balance of it as 6420. If there were any receivables, there'd be another line there. So then inventory and receivable subtotal is showing that. And then the my assets total is now showing this balance of 31,984.61. It's basically taking that balance, or the balances of the total buckets, if you will, prior to it, and totaling them up. So in essence, if we want to think about it this way, total 1 is basically looking at anything in total buckets below it, of which there aren't any. Total 2 would be looking at anything from the details and total 1 buckets. Total 3 would be looking at any detail that hasn't been pulled in, and anything from total 2 or 1 and kind of so forth. And basically all the way up to, I think that the final total would be total 9, or at least it was in prior versions. I haven't really set up a whole report that would get through all those different totals, but that's basically the concept of how that works. Again, if that doesn't make sense, let me know in the questions box. But in essence, what you now have is the core capability of being able to grab whatever detail you want to pull in, display it as detail line items, and then using the total lines, you could then tally up and total what those details are, as well as any subtotals prior to that with lower total group numbers. So just to kind of extend on that concept, let's go back and edit the report maybe one more time. So we'll grab that test accounting report. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and find the my cash in the bank, and we'll uncheck that reverse sign, and we'll save that. So now let's do this. Let's do a page break here on the my assets total, and we'll save that. We'll now add another line. So we're going to call this one a header line, and we'll do a liabilities. There we go. So we'll make that be the first indent, and we'll save that. And then we'll do a very basic one here. So we'll add a detail line, and we'll do accounts payable. Payables without the caps. We'll indent that 2. And then we will go ahead and add our details. So payable, we'll do accounts payable. We will also pull in inventory received. I guess it's just INV received. There it is, pending invoice. And then I know there won't be any ledger detail in there, but let's also pull in a notes payable line. So that's basically going to make up our detail line starting on our second page, if you will. So we'll add that, we'll save that. We'll add another line, detail, and we will do taxes and customer deposits, just to have something in there again. I don't know, I don't think there's a whole lot of detail in these particular systems or line items, but let's go ahead and pull in sales tax. We need to make sure we give this an indent again, so we'll do that as second level. Let's add a deposit account. So we'll do contract deposits. We'll do layaways, items on layaway, and one more, we'll do service deposits. If I could spell, there we go. Okay, I think that's enough detail there. So we'll save that, and then we will add another total line. So we'll go ahead and add a total line, total or subtotal payables and taxes deposits. And we will make this be a third level indent. We're going to make this be total group 1. We'll save that. There we go. We'll do another detail line. And we'll call this one other liabilities. Again, I don't think I actually have any ledger detail in these accounts that I'm pulling in, but just to kind of keep the concept going. So, you know, if you were building a report, you would probably be thinking of things like this. So let's go ahead and look at, let's say, buildings, land, and vehicles. We'll save that, and then we'll do a total line, and let's do total liabilities, and we'll indent that to the third level, and we'll make that be group 2. We'll save that, and then we'll do one final total line, and we'll say this is assets less liabilities. Now, of course, in a proper balance sheet, they should be balanced. And this is by no means a proper balance sheet, nor is this actually been set up with balancing entries or anything like that, because it's just something that gets whipped together for some demo data. But we'll go ahead and do that one centered, and we'll do this one to be total group 3. Again, mostly just to make sure that this concept makes sense. So with our report built, we will go ahead and run the report probably one more time here to custom accounting reports, our test accounting report, 1-1, Dubuque, and we'll just run the report and print it to screen. So here we are as far as our assets page. So it kind of stops itself off there at the My Assets Total. Notice how this now has a second page to it because we put that page break in. Let's go ahead and move up to page 2. So here's the liabilities. So taxes and customer deposits has some amount in it. So the credit balance of $455. There weren't any other details there as far as it could pull in. So you kind of see it's skipping those other detail lines. So it's showing the subtotal of payables and taxes with the figure that it pulled in from the detail before that, total liabilities from there, and now the assets less liabilities you'll see here, this is coming up with a balance of 31,980.06. If we go back to the previous page, you see how this is a 31,984.61. So basically, it's withdrawing, if you will, or taking into account this amount, the credit of 455, and it's combining that with the previous total from bucket 2. So remember how, if I grab the highlighter probably one more time here, recall that this was total group 1. This was also total group 1, and this was total group 2. Now if we go ahead and go to the second page, grab my highlighter again. So this was total 1, this was total 2, and this was total 3. So hopefully that makes sense as far as how that works, that relationship between the different total groups and the detail that makes up those totals. So again, the idea here is that you could basically create whatever reports that you need, and they'll be easily available as far as being able to run them at any given time. Let me go ahead and just get rid of those highlights there. So then, of course, what you could basically then do is with the system as it is in version 12, you could basically select whatever you wanted to have on these different fields, the report name that you want to run it for, the date range that you want to run it for, the location, tax authority, departments, workstations, checkboxes, and you can create report preferences that basically would follow all those selections. You could then call this Bill's Weekly Accounting Report. You could select which employees would have access to that preference of selections. As far as the begin and end dates that are coming up here, we could either leave them fixed, so it would keep the 1/1 through 4/12 right now if I save this as is. The other thing I could do is I could do the beginning of the current week and the end of the current week. I guess there is no end of current week. That's interesting. So let's just do the beginning of the current week, and then we will plus it by 7. So that's basically how we could kind of get around that end of current week. Now watch what happens if I go ahead and say OK. So you'll see how it now shows 4/7 through 4/14. So basically it's kind of looking at the current week. So of course the beginning would be, if I'm looking at my calendar, Sunday, April 7th, and it's going up through basically 7 days through that. So it's kind of going up through the next Sunday. So I could probably have done 6 to kind of make that sure that that's just going through the next Saturday. But then anytime you come in and run that report, you want to run that same report, you go back to the custom accounting reports, you right click and you say load those preferences. It'll pull all those things in that you selected. And if you wanted them to automatically come up every time you go to run this report, what you could do is when you set these up, you can check mark it to be a default. So by check marking it as default, every time you come in and run that report, that'll be the detail or the default parameters for when you run that report. Now that is specific to employees. So if I go back and look at the update one more time, the available employees, whichever employees you check mark, not only would have the ability to select that report preferences, but by checkmarking default, when they run this report, those would be the parameters that automatically come up for them. There's going to be a webinar that I'm going to do on some other kind of specifics with version 12. It'll be kind of a getting to know version 12 webinar that I've done in the past, but this will be specific to kind of some tips and tricks for getting the most out of version 12. And one of those things that I'll be highlighting will be, this will be in the month of May, this will be how to set up automatic reporting. So that'll be core, what we just talked about in that automatic reporting feature that we'll be looking at in that webinar. So that's basically setting up of a custom accounting reports. Now I want to go back and just highlight a few things here that could be helpful when you're making these reports yourself. If, as you're adding line items, you discover, oh, shoot, I need to manipulate the order of lines that I've keyed in, you'd be able to click this little set line order button here, and then basically it'll give you all of the lines that you've been setting up, and you can basically click and drag them around wherever you want them to go. You could say sort alphabetically from A to Z, or the opposite is also true from Z to A. If you click accept, it'll go ahead and accept that. I'm going to hit cancel because I've got it exactly the way I want it. Again, if you wanted to start from an existing report and create a new, slightly different report from it, you can click the clone button. We'll give it a new report name. This is Test Accounting Part 2. Not that we'll get into a Part 2, but just so you can kind of see how that works. So basically now I've got two reports there. One is the first one, the second one is the second one. It's taken all the detail lines, all the headers, the totals, etc., and basically cloned it, and now I could go in and make whatever adjustments I want without having to recreate the entire report from scratch. And then one other thing that I want to point out here, if we go ahead and add a third report, so we'll call this the income custom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, we'll start with the income statement. So notice how there is now an additional checkbox here that says POS. So basically that's short for percent of sales. When you hover over it, it says, is this total line your total sales used for calculating percentage of sales? So that's going to be kind of specific to total lines. Do you want that to be incorporated into a total percentage for your sales? There may be some times when you want to list out some totals that you don't want to actually include as a percentage of your total sales. So that's something to keep in mind with that. Now, you might notice when we switch this to a balance sheet, that checkbox changes to an INC. Is this the line you want the current year's income to be placed? So that's basically, as far as like the actual income, where do you want that to kind of show up? You basically check mark the line where you want that, and it would incorporate that into the report. So that's basically it, really, as far as custom accounting reports. Hopefully this has been helpful. Looking to the not next week, but the following week of April. So April 22nd, 24th, and 26th. Those will be the the webinars that kind of wrap up our astonishing accounting series. So April 22nd, we're going to be getting into budgeting. So basically how you can set up budgets, and we'll be talking about departments as well as kind of like a sub topic to that webinar. On Wednesday, April 24th, we're going to be talking about auditing your ledger, how to do adjustments and reversals if necessary. I like to call this the human element because everyone, myself included, I'm certainly not above admitting that I do make mistakes, sometimes right here on camera, most often on camera. So basically that webinar will be talking about how to go back and check your reports, check your ledger, make sure it's all jiving, if necessary, make adjustments, and in some cases just do complete reversals. And then we'll wrap up the month on April 26th, Friday, April 26th, with accounting periods and how to do a year-end close. So accounting periods, if you want to be able to prevent someone from going back and making adjustments in an accounting period that's been closed, we'll take a look at that, and we'll take a look at year-end process, what that encompasses, what that entails as far as what actually happens with the system when you do a year-end close, and how to make sure it's going to go smoothly for you. Thanks so much for attending today's webinar on custom accounting reports. If you do have any questions, definitely go ahead and punch them into that questions box. If you have any questions after the fact, feel free to go ahead and email those to me, training@technology4retailers.com. Be more than happy to answer any questions that come in. Of course, if you have any questions that you think are more support related, always give our support team a call. I always like to list them as our first call line. So if you have any questions really at all and you want to speak to someone live, that's the best way to do it, in my opinion. We have 15 of them versus one of me, so I may not always be immediately available. And looking ahead to the month of May, we're going to kind of have it's going to be, for lack of a better term, a little bit of a smaller period of webinars. We're not going to have them the first kind of, if we were looking at the normal schedule, it would normally be May 6th, 8th, and 10th, and then the 20th, 22nd, and 24th. I'm not going to be available for the first part of that, the 6th and the 8th, but we will do a webinar on the 10th, as well as on the 20th, the 22nd, and the 24th. I don't have the webinar schedule itself as far as what those webinars will be finalized just yet, but expect at least one webinar on the report designer, so the custom reporting feature here in AMSI. Where's my mouse? There it is. So this section here for the report designer and how to run those. That'll be one of them for sure. Like I said, we'll do another one on some tips and tricks and efficiencies with version 12, and then at least two more depending on what I feel will be relevant. And that does lead me to the tip I always like to try and make sure everyone remembers. If at any point you have an idea for a webinar or a webinar topic, definitely email those to me as well. You can also phone them in and let me know, because I want to make sure that these webinars are relevant to your day-to-day usage with AMSI, that you're getting the most out of the system. So if there's anything I can do, definitely let me know. Thanks so much again for attending. I don't see any questions coming in, and it looks like most folks are kind of filing out of the session. So I think I'll go ahead and sign off. I hope you make it a great day.